Roughly 80% of our training completions annually is via digital media, e-learning, learning videos. But 20% of our training takes place face-to-face. And that will always be a very crucial part of our training strategy. So I wouldn't be able to do my job without the technology that supports it. That's true now during a time of crisis, but this is always true, and it's becoming increasingly true. It's hard to imagine life without an LMS. It's hard to imagine going back to the old-fashioned ways of tracking training with paper sign-in sheets. That approach no longer fits in these times of globalized training and large training campaigns. And I'm finding that LMS systems are becoming increasingly prevalent in the market and increasingly essential. Like most organizations, our learning efforts span a lot of different efforts categories, learning methods, media, self-directed, manager-driven, classroom, delivery via videos, e-learnings. We have face-to-face meetings and virtual collaboration. Roughly 80% of our training completions annually is via digital media, e-learning, learning videos. But 20% of our training takes place face-to-face. And that will always be a very crucial part of our training strategy. Right now, as we are facing the coronavirus pandemic, we have had to make a major pivot. We find ourselves in a situation where all of our global trainers, local trainers, are working from home, have to cancel their travel plans, and have to figure out how they are going to maintain their training programs and get crucial content out there to their target audience, facing the fact that they can no longer travel. And that's been a very challenging situation. One result of this is that it has placed increased demands on the LMS. The LMS, in other words, has become increasingly popular and increasingly used. And this has also resulted in a shift of this classroom training to other forms of training, learning videos, documentation, e-learnings, and virtual meetings. And the first three of those items I mentioned are generally tracked automatically when they're uploaded and distributed through the LMS. And just like classroom training, virtual meetings need to be entered into the LMS if they're going to be tracked. And we are trying to track as much training as humanly possible. And so therefore, this has been a time where the LMS has proven itself to be very essential in delivering training, tracking training, and also in the delivery of reports to identify return on investment. So this particular time of this global pandemic has been very, very challenging, but it's a bit of a case study in how essential an LMS is to global training plans. So within my organization, we have a variety of target audiences, but three that are very important, or three major categories, are new hires, high potential employees, and sales and service. And it's very crucial that we get training content out to them. And a time like this, when we have been disrupted by something like the coronavirus, doesn't change the reality that content needs to get out to them. And our LMS is utilized every step of the process, from the registration aspect. There's also opportunities to use the LMS for free information, even before the registration. We have an LMS library. We have a training catalog within the LMS. We encourage learners to look for this content, look for training that's relevant to them. You can use the LMS to highlight major training categories and send it to specific target audiences to give them a bit more of a targeted search opportunity instead of having them, needing to find everything on their own. So we're utilizing a lot of that functionality even more. And for me, this has become a bit of an opportunity to highlight a lot of these benefits of the LMS to my training community because the demands out there are stronger than they had been in the past. So the tracking is a little bit different, or the requirement for tracking has increased now. Now that we're bringing more trainers into the fold, since they are needing to use the LMS more, I'm trying to identify ways to allow them to identify the return on investment on their training, to utilize the system more efficiently, to focus on more automated approaches to using the LMS and saving them time in the long run. And that's why I think for any of you that are interested in learning more about LMS systems and using them most effectively is to try to research what kind of automation opportunities your LMS has or any LMS has. Some people are delivering training on a small scale, and therefore automation may not be as important to you. But those of you that are doing very large training campaigns, it can be very time consuming if you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of people that need to be registered into training and you need to manage their participations in the LMS. Anything you can do to reduce your manual effort is something you should look into. An example I use from my organization is one of our global training campaigns. It's the Code of Conduct e-learning campaign. So we have about 16,500 people globally in this company, and they all must take the Code of Conduct training once a year. And to do something like this, to manage such a program manually would just not be feasible. So I'm utilizing the LMS's automation features, and one example of that is something that is called audiences. And this is where you can identify a group of people that are to be registered into a training. And every month for this Code of Conduct e-learning campaign, we register about 1,500 people per month. So as long as I have those names of people that need to be registered in this month, I can put it into the LMS, into this audience, and I can set an assignment date, and then the system does all the work. Within every month, it's about 5 minutes worth of work maximum to register 1,500 people, and it's an unbelievable time saver. If I want reports on how are the completion rates for the Code of Conduct e-learning, I can have an automated process where every 2 weeks an email is sent to me with that report attached. So I don't even have to do any thinking. I can just get reminded by the LMS, so to speak, and they send me the report on a scheduled basis. We're utilizing that feature more and more as time goes by because it's really quite a time saver. One thing that is a primary focus for us is to evaluate return on investment on our trainings. It's not enough to just register people into an e-learning, for example, and then have the faith that you're going to get an excellent completion ratio and that people are going to learn the training is just wonderful and everybody loves it. You need to take active steps to identify improvement opportunities, and to identify learner satisfaction, and to see if you're getting the benefits that you hoped for the training. Reporting is a key way that we do that. We're running reports on completion ratios. We're running reports on learner satisfaction based on learner evaluations. And these, as mentioned before, can be automated. And these are things that give us an excellent idea of the success of our trainings. And that follow-up piece is really an important one. So to summarize, it's really hard to imagine life without an LMS. Whether it's small campaigns, whether it's large campaigns, we live in a time of training requirements, of compliance needs, of required safety training. We live in an age where we need to demonstrate that our learners have been upskilled or just completed training that's required legally. And we need to be able to identify success and learner skills via reports. And all of these items that I've mentioned are very crucial components of an LMS. And therefore, I highly recommend that you do a thorough check of what features and functionalities exist within that LMS, and match them to your training goals. And I think that will help improve your success with your training campaigns in the future.
Hello, everybody. This is Michael Redford here. I hope you enjoyed my recorded presentation. Now I'm here to present some responses to some questions that I've received. So starting right away with the first question. Good question. Looking back, what would you do differently? That's a difficult question to answer because hindsight is always 20/20. But nobody expected the changed requirements with the new situation, the new world situation, the coronavirus, and how that's impacted everybody's life. My experience with this has been very intensive in that the demands upon training have increased. The number of completions and trainings that we see in the LMS via our reports, that has increased significantly, and therefore this has increased my workload as the LMS Program Lead, managing the system globally. And I think a lot of trainers within the organization feel the same way. There's been, as mentioned, there was a very large pivot from classroom training, which basically became non-existent, all to digital learning. And with hindsight being 20/20, perhaps I could say that I wish I had done a bit more on the promotion. That includes before the pandemic hit, but also during the last couple months when all these changes have taken place. Now, the promotion I've done to promote digital learning, whether it's e-learnings or documents, using documents as learning activities, or learning videos, online courses, etc., all these digital alternatives that are now being applied to substitute for classroom training. I feel I've been putting a lot of effort into promoting to my very well-known training community, the people that I collaborate with. But I think more effort could be done, and this is something that people in my role perhaps agree with, to reach out and try to find new contacts and identify who else might be a little bit lost in the woods during this unprecedented situation. So as the smoke is beginning to clear, as far as the stabilizing of the training community being able to deliver their training digitally, then I think that's going to be an item that I'll be focusing on more, is promoting to some of the training contacts that I haven't had as much communication with. And a lot of this has been done for me because a lot of people that I hadn't known that have a training role have reached out to me and asked questions about the LMS, asked questions about how they can deliver their training digitally, and best practices, and these sorts of things. So promotion of the system, promotion of best practices for online learning, those are items that I would emphasize more in the future. So the second question It's hard to quantify being ready for growth, but what business metrics have you used to measure the return on investment for your investment? Yeah, it's definitely difficult to be ready for such a significant pivot that we've all been forced to make, considering the changes to our training requirements given the coronavirus. Metrics generally come from the reports, and that is as far as analyzing our training interventions themselves. Business metrics, that's a little bit more difficult. I would be very interested in hearing the feedback from the participants here as far as how they measure the connection between their training initiatives and how this impacts the business positively. It's, from my understanding and from my research and experience in this field, that it's extremely difficult to draw a straight line from your training initiatives to how this impacts profit. It's not always like a complete one-to-one, and there are always a lot of factors that actually can close a sale, for example. I don't think many people would debate the importance of training for the potential of making sales and improving company revenue, improving company skills, the safety of workers, or whatever training initiative. But as far as the metrics and how we quantify that, to me, it comes back to the reports and to look at the actual numbers. The numbers don't tell everything, but they can give you a good lead-in for further research. For example, if I've got a training colleague who is in our global sales organization or within sales for one of our product groups, I can look at the training reports, and this can give me a clue whether or not this person is harnessing or utilizing the training or delivering adequate training. And I can use this as a conversation starter, set up a meeting with this person and say, are there any opportunities for you to apply more training for your team, for yourself? What within your team, what are some learning gaps that perhaps we could address? So return on investment is one part, but with regards to the metrics that an LMS provides, it's about return on investment, but it's also looking for gaps and opportunities. So let's go on to the third question. Excuse me for a second. Okay. What innovative campaigns have you used to increase the usage of e-learning? Well, as far as campaigns are concerned, we have so many campaigns globally, and I'm responsible for one of the larger ones, which is the Code of Conduct, which I mentioned in the recorded piece, where I emphasized a lot of the automative features of the LMS. There are other campaigns that we have that are not only just about delivering training per se, but we have some global assessments that are really making some progress within the organization. And it links a little bit to the previous question that I just spoke about as far as return on investment. We have these assessment campaigns that with hundreds of questions translated into a variety of languages. And let's just say, again, sales for sales people. We bundle these questions into categories and topic groups, and we deliver them in such a way so that we can get reporting output to get people's knowledge levels per topic. And then let's say we have 10 topics that we're testing on. We bundle that all together, and we can analyze the learner. Let's say Karen. Karen is very strong in topics 1 through 5, but not as strong in topics 6 through 10. So we have follow-up processes for the topics that require more improvement. And those could be classroom training, learning videos, e-learnings, etc. So I'm not sure that that's a campaign. It's a bit more of an approach, but it goes back to the ROI, because what we also do with these assessments is we have follow-ups. I'm not 100% sure what our frequency is, but let's just say, for example, that it happens once a year. We track the progress for each successive assessment round to make sure that the learning gets enhanced. And so that's an example of an approach we've taken to identify knowledge levels and to have follow-up approaches when the knowledge levels are not as adequate as they could be. So going on to the next question. What are best practices around moving instructor-led or traditional learning to virtual? Yeah, that's a difficult question. I don't pretend to be an expert on this. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach. And if there is, I can't give it to you right now. It's a process. It's not comparing apples to apples. Instructor-led training has the luxury of being able to keep 20 people in a room for 2 days and being able to spontaneously modify your training approach. You can look people in the eye and say, you know what, I think the audience is confused. I'm going to provide a bit more explanation. So you have more spontaneity. You have a bit more weapons at your disposal, so to speak, with instructor-led training. So it's not a simple process at all to transfer that to something virtual. And virtual has a variety of categories. If you're going to be doing something like a virtual conference, like a WebEx or an MS Teams or a Zoom kind of thing, that gives you a bit more spontaneity. You certainly wouldn't want to do a 2-day Zoom because you'd have a very depressed audience at the end. However, you can break this into 60-minute sessions, 90-minute sessions, and people won't be revolting and sprinting for the doors. And keep in mind that I think, our organization, and I'm sure others out there, are tracking virtual trainings like a Zoom meeting or a WebEx or other systems where you can have video conferences or audio conferences in this way. And I think that's a very good practice. I think one thing that is going to happen because of this coronavirus is that organizations may be looking at their balance between classroom training and virtual training. And there might be a bit more of an increased pressure to move to virtual. And though I don't have a perfect answer about how to do it, it's definitely something that all of us training specialists should get a little bit more versed in best practices for virtual. So when it comes to e-learning, e-learnings tend to be maximum 30 minutes, maximum 45 minutes. The trend is, of course, going more towards micro-learnings. That creates a lot of challenges as far as trying to take a classroom training that was maybe half a day, 1 day, 2 days, and putting this into a virtual package. One thing that we have done, and I've done in my trainings in the past, is to do the best you can to provide the need to know information in as efficient a package as possible. So maybe you have something like a WebEx for 60 or 90 minutes where you can cover a lot of the key topics where interaction might be helpful, and you can create some kind of curriculum with various learning items within it, documents for future study, e-learnings, learning videos. You can also create links to further study, to internet pages or other resources. And perhaps an assessment at the end, a quiz at the end to identify the learning goals or the learning attainment. And if people are failing these assessments, you could look at the assessment itself and say, okay, did I design that well? Or if the assessment is fine and people are failing, then you might want to look at the training itself. So hopefully that wasn't too rambling an answer, but hopefully it gave you a little bit of food for thought for that one. Next question. Are you aware of solutions that can be used when you have a small target audience and not the scale to afford a typical LMS? That's a good question. I think the size of the target audience, you don't want to purchase an LMS perhaps if you are working with an organization of only about 30 or 40 people. However, in that case, that's a rare case, I think. When training will take place, I imagine that such a small organization would have used some of the more old-fashioned, for lack of a better term, methods, Excel or printed sign-in sheets. More and more in this day and age where metrics are important, auditing is a reality of life. Certain countries are more lawsuit-oriented than others. And, an LMS is becoming increasingly important in this kind of context because we need to demonstrate that that people have been trained for compliance reasons, as legal reasons as well. So it's not a perfect answer. If you're not going to be using an LMS, then there needs to be some kind of centralized way, emphasis on centralized, to track your training. Because if you do get audited and 12 different people have to collect every different way that they've been tracking training, then it's going to be a nightmare. And this is really kind of the bread and butter of an LMS, is to be able to centralize training completion data and training incompletion data in one place. That's really one major reason why LMSs are becoming more increasingly used. Another question I have, are you aware of solutions? Oh, I'm repeating the same one. Give me just 1 second. Which metrics have given you the most value to your business? That's a really good question. It sounds maybe too simple, but basic reports that show very clearly completion data, incomplete learners, and attainment of test scores. This is really where we start. There was another question in there that someone asked that basically said, where would you start if you're looking for an LMS? Maybe that's a question I really want to answer because it's kind of connected to this. Where would you start if you're researching the purchase or the acquisition of an LMS? I would start with your needs, your organization's needs. And if you're within a training department that has to make this decision, don't just speak with people on your team. Maybe that's a good place to start, but get out there with some of the stakeholders in the business units or nonprofit units or whatever, those that will have some kind of interaction with the LMS, even if they don't know anything about the LMS systems in general. Find out what their training goals are and what kind of usages they will have for the LMS. Metrics, reports, that's what draws a lot of customers to LMS systems. Because of course you need to be able to quantify your training efforts and to demonstrate this to the organization, to your colleagues. Reporting was a very, very important aspect of why we chose our LMS, and we're very pleased with that reporting because we can get just a huge amount of data, not just the basics of completion and incomplete, but we can look at our assessments and not only say, okay, Joe Smith got a 75% score, he passed, but also you can look at specific questions, what people answered, to identify which topic areas are really tough for people and where can we perhaps implement a couple training interventions to upskill them in these areas. So reporting is definitely one aspect of why of what you should look at when you're looking at LMS systems. User experience is huge. You could have a very, very complex, multifunctional, wonderful LMS with all the bells and whistles, but if it's a nightmare for the users, then it's just going to be a deal breaker. The automation items that I mentioned earlier in the recorded aspect, that's really key. When you are looking at LMS systems, it's really good to do your homework in advance as far as what's out there. Not only what companies, but also what do LMS systems do. You can look at different sites that rate different LMSs, and then you could contact the company and ask for certain more details. But I think that the starting point is to not just contact a salesperson and say, give us the speech. No, really do the homework for your needs and map it out really well. And speak to as many stakeholders as possible, because one person or two people or even a training team won't be able to come up with all of the best features that you'll be needing. So here's another question. I think I might be running low on time, but I manage a staff completely comprised of volunteers. Have you seen any metrics of success, especially on self-improvement learning in those populations? That's a tricky one. Self-improvement learning it's difficult to identify self-improvement for learning communities unless you build in a process. This is just off the top of my head. Unless you build in a process where you test people on very similar topics or the same topics periodically. That's difficult to do, to measure actual improvement. But that's a very good practice when you have very important topics that are central to your business, then you might want to build in periodic testing processes to be able to show improvement over time. Now, I may have reached all of the questions. I'm going to have to take a look. Yep, I think we are pretty much done. If I have time for one more, here's another. We've also converted much of our compliance policy security awareness curriculum to online learning, e-learning courses. However, how do you make the transition to e-learning for the IoT courses that are skills-based, such as Excel training, etc.? Yeah, that's difficult. If I were put in such a situation where we had to convert something like Excel or software training to an e-learning or digital learning solution, I would probably go to the market and look at what exists in the market from off-the-shelf providers that have good content, because it would be very complicated, I think, to make the effort to take your existing training and publish that into an e-learning. Maybe some people are faster than I am on that topic, but that would be a little bit difficult. For something like Excel training, there's so much good content out there on the market from off-the-shelf providers that you probably won't struggle to find the content that you want. Maybe it depends if the price is right. So software might be one of the easier items to cover. There are other topics that are just very, very difficult to transfer from classroom to the digital world. And I'm certainly not an expert on that. When you're dealing with things that are physical in nature, that requires quite a bit more effort, I would say. What I hear other organizations are doing, and I think we're doing this also in our organization, is to film, to create learning videos, to try to simulate the classroom training that you're doing or that you did previously, and try to create film and get something that is as close to what you were typically presenting live face-to-face, and package these as learning videos. And then, of course, you need to structure them and, deliver them. But that is something that I see that is a majorly growing trend for us training specialists, is using video for learning. And I think that this experience with so many trainers being grounded will force us all to kind of reevaluate how we delivered training in the past and how we will deliver it in the future. And of course, as I mentioned a bunch of times, digital learning is just going to grow significantly because of this. But I think video learning is definitely going to be enhanced. So, next question is, let's see, that's not a question, that's a comment. What has been the most difficult challenge to overcome on your journey? I may have answered that already. Again, it's just volume. Volume has increased significantly during this time. And this will absolutely continue. Anyone who has any kind of responsibility related to e-learning or digital learning will definitely find themselves rather popular in this time. And I'm also noticing that many of our trainers in the training community are really enhancing their knowledge on digital learning and delivery. We're also looking into new tracking mechanisms. For example, as I believe I mentioned earlier, we will be tracking more intensively the virtual learning that we've done through MS Teams or WebEx. Because in the past, this had been more related to meeting tools and just face-to-face collaboration when people are in different parts of the world. But now we're applying this much more intensively for training. And therefore, there's a need for tracking this. And I do recommend tracking these separately to make them distinct from your typical classroom training, where you got 25 people in a room and did your 2-day training. Because it's good to get the metrics to show what you are doing virtually for a couple of reasons. You could check the comments from the learners, and you can see if people are actually learning and benefiting from your virtual training. You might see a bunch of comments that say, oh, really, I wish we could have done this face-to-face because it just didn't work for me. Or you could see that it's quite positively received. And you can compare this to the comments you get from your classroom training. So, and also you may want to demonstrate your what you did deliver virtually, as far as virtual real-time face-to-face training, compared to your classroom training. And you can try to identify whether or not there has been any kind of loss or disadvantages in shifting more of your face-to-face training to a virtual setup. So I think you see where I'm going with this, but tracking virtual trainings can tell you quite a lot. And I believe that is the extent of the questions that I have. So I may have gone a bit over time compared to the schedule, but hopefully you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you for your very interesting questions, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present. So with that, I will say goodbye, signing off. Thank you.